Mr. District Attorney, good to see you. Welcome
Good
to The
to see
Issue
you.
Is.
Thank you.
And thank you for having us in your home today.
Absolutely. The people's home.
The people's home. So I usually will end an interview with this question, but I think it's fitting to start an interview with you with this question because there's so much said about you.
Yes.
What do you think is the biggest misconception about you?
Oh my goodness. I think there's, look, I think that when you are a public figure, there's a lot of conversations sometimes that are not necessarily connected to who the person is. I think that many people often think that I do not care about public safety, which is so contrary to the truth. The fact is that I have been involved in policing and, looking for community safety for 40 years. I go to bed thinking about public safety. I get up in the morning thinking about public safety. I care deeply about the safety of our community, and I live in a community, right? I have family, I have grandkids, so it's not like I'm some Martian that just drops in the morning to go to work and then goes someplace else. I live here.
Do you feel safe in LA County right now?
I do. I mean, when you look at where crime is heading in, the city of LA, and many of the cities around the county, and you look at even the county sheriff, which, has different stations throughout the county. You look at homicides, for instance. Homicides are historic lows. Overall, the trends are promising. Having said that, look, any crime is always unacceptable. Any murder is unacceptable. So to that end, that's why I said I go at night thinking about this work. I get up in the morning thinking about this work, because there is never such a thing as crime is too low, right? There's always going to be things that we need to attend to.
And I know you've thought deeply about sort of the way we've thought about criminal justice. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of folks that felt like in the 90s we went too far to the right, and then we pushed back, and some folks feel like we went too far to the left in the pushback of that. Where do you think we are now?
Well, look, I think the first of all is important. Look, homicides are probably one of the best barometers of where crime is in general, right? Because that's one of the few crimes that we know is never over or underreported, right? It is what it is. And when you look at where we are in terms of homicide as a county, we're at this historic lows. I think that's a good barometer. Now, we have other areas where we've had problems. We've had problems with organized retail theft.
Right.
We have problems with residential burglaries. And we're attending to those. We're being very aggressive. We have prosecuted over 100,000 serious crimes and felony crimes in the last 3 years. You look at organized retail theft, right? We have prosecuted now over 1,300 of those cases. We're getting convictions at 89% of those cases, just this year alone, right? 477 cases have been prosecuted. And as the police increase their activity here, often there's a misconception of how the system works, right? We know, police investigate and arrest. We prosecute, courts do the sentencing. Mm-hmm. We cannot prosecute until the police makes an arrest. We have seen a tremendous increase in the activity around policing with organized retail theft and residential burglaries, and we have reacted to that. When you look, for instance, in 2019, before my administration, we were getting in the low 60s conviction rate on organized retail theft. You look at what we are today, we're 89%. That is a reflection of a combination of things. A reflection that obviously we had an increase, but also a reflection in police paying attention to it because we had the increase, and us, putting a different level of emphasis on these crimes.
What does 4 more years of you look like? What's the biggest policy priority for the next 4 years?
Look, I think that hopefully I will get reelected, and if I do, as we continue to address the evolution of crime and the evolution of public safety in our community, one of my goals is us to evolve in our own practice. So whether we're talking about gun crimes, for instance, we've now filed, about 12,000 plus gun enhancement cases, right? But instead of doing it like we did prior to my administration, where we were filing, it was a blanket policy I was filing, and we're focusing on the people that are causing the harm. We'll continue to do that, and we'll continue to evolve. Organized retail theft, we've worked really hard, not only at dealing with what the police is bringing us, but also dealing with a public policy stance. So working with the governor, working with the state legislature to tighten up our legislative tools in order to address what was clearly a new evolution of organized crime, right? Whether it's with the organized, the people stealing, but also the vehicles to sell this stuff, right? Like Amazon and those things. So actually working to create new state law that requires the online retailers or the online platforms that provide the capacity for online retailers to be able to verify that the individual selling the property has the right to sell it, right? That would not have been an issue 20 years ago or even 10 years ago, right? So there's going to continue to be evolutions in our work, and what is there to expect if I were to be honored with another 4 years is a continuing balanced approach to the work and addressing the areas of crime that we can control, working with the police, working with community, and continuing hopefully to see the same downward trend that we're seeing today.
But how do you think about that balance? Because there are folks that knew you, say in the 90s when you were an LAPD cop, that say that you're different now. What changed your philosophy? How do you see, what is your basic philosophy when it comes to criminal justice and criminal justice reform, real concisely?
Yeah, look, I mean, in the 1990s, I was very much a product of the moment, right? We were mass incarcerating people. We incarcerated a lot of people. We increased our rates of recidivism. We didn't necessarily create more safety, right? We were reacting to horrible increases in crime at that time. We're in a different place today. I've also matured. I'm in a different place. Frankly, I'm in a different place today than I was in 2018 or 2020 or 2022. And if I were to be reelected 2 or 3 years from now, I believe that it is critical for a leader, critical for a human being, to evolve and face the new conditions that they're facing, whatever they are.
So how have you evolved from, say, 2018 or 2020? What did you maybe get right at the beginning? What did you get wrong? What have you learned from?
I think, for instance, organized retail theft, right? When I got elected, we were in the middle of COVID, right? And we started to see this evolution of this crime that wasn't, it was always there, but it was very different contextually than it did. So learning how to deal with that, and it took all of us. It took law enforcement, a period of time to, we put task forces together. We started doing work differently. In my office, we said, we're going to funnel all this through our organized crime division because this is really organized crime. We started thinking about conspiracy. We started thinking about other charges that normally we would not have thought about 4 or 5 years ago in general terms. I mean, no question that we used those before. I used those in the past, but very, very seldom did we. But now we use them very regularly because that's what the text of the crime looks like.
But in terms of some of the blanket policies that you started off with, you backed off on some of them. What are some of the lessons you've learned in terms of that?
Yeah, well, there were blanket policies in the office before I came in, right? The blanket policy before is always seek the maximum sentence, right? Always seek the maximum charging. And I came in and I said, we're not going to do that anymore. But we immediately started to adjust. And as my management team started to develop as well. So for instance, very early on, right, we said we're not going to do enhancements with hate crimes, right? And there was a lot of people that said, George, this is a real concern for us because hate crimes are going up. Since 2016, hate crimes have just skyrocketed in the country. I recognize that, and we immediately unwound that and started alleging hate crimes. When it comes to guns, we adjusted on that, right? And we've now filed, we're averaging about 4,000 gun enhancement charges a year. We created a committee of people at the top of the organization to review cases where special circumstances was appropriate, and since then we have charged a lot of special circumstance cases. So it's the evolution, but it's also the adjustments we're growing into the place.
So what is the biggest change of George Gascón 2024 compared to 2020?
I think that the biggest change is, we actually are not under COVID, right? I mean, my first 2 years were everything was remote, right? I mean, I was walking to many places in our county, and there was, courts were partially shut down. So that caused me to, operate in an environment that I was not used to. Today, we're back to a normal environment. And we're also, our management team has matured. We've hired about 150 new lawyers since I've been in office. The work continues to mature and evolve, and we look at things a little differently than we did in 2020. And we will, by the way, again, if we were to have this conversation 2 years from now, I'm sure that we will again.
But you've also had some turmoil internally. There's been millions of dollars paid out in retaliation lawsuits. A lot of people that worked for you ended up running against you. Why are they wrong? What do you say to the critics that worked here against you?
Yeah, well, first of all, now millions of dollars have been paid off, right?
Yeah.
We have one judgment of $1.5 million that is being appealed. There are other lawsuits that are pending. But look, I mean, this is a lot of this is the product of, somebody that is coming from the outside with a mandate to do business differently than the way it was done before. You mentioned the George Gascón in 1990, right? And the George Gascón in 1990 is a different person than the George Gascón of today. Not necessarily in the basic principles of, honesty and integrity, because I think those are immovable, right? But how you look at the work. I think that this profession has been, for the last 20 plus 30 years, we grew up in a way where the concept of public safety was always directly associated with trying to seek the maximum possible punishment. We went as a state from having under 30,000 people in state prison in the early 1980s to having 170,000 people by 2014, right? And clearly the population did not grow that much. So there has been an evolution, as you mentioned before, where there was a swing, very strong swing in one direction, then there was a correction in the other, and then there's a correction again. And I think that we'll continue to see that, and that impacts how some people view themselves and view the work inside the office as people in the community do.
Are you concerned that there's a swing back to the right?
Look, if you look over 20, 30-year cycles, you're always going to see the right-left swing, right? There's overcorrection, and then things come to the center. I believe that actually I don't see necessarily a swing to the right as much as I see more of a swing to a center. And I think we also see that there's also, there's a lot of misinformation that is being corrected, and people, I'm out in the community a lot, right? And I have seen people who are a year ago, they say, crime is skyrocketing, and then now people say, well, what is it the truth? Because I'm hearing two numbers, right? So people are beginning to question, and it gives us an opportunity to educate. So I think that it's not necessarily that it's going, wildly to the right. I think it's just, it's coming back to the center of gravity.
What are you proudest of?
Look, first of all, I'm very proud of my family, right? So that, I would tell you that, my daughters, my kids, or my grandkids, I'm very, very proud of that. I'm also very proud of the fact that I feel very good about how I look at myself in the mirror in the morning or at night, but I'm giving it 100%.
What do you see? What do you see when you look in the mirror?
I look at someone that tries very hard, someone that is very committed to the safety of our community. I look at someone that is human, makes mistakes, but I'm also very proud of the fact that I admit my mistakes and try to fix them and move on.
And how so?
In whatever.
I know one thing you're especially proud of is the process of getting people who were wrongfully convicted to be free. Yes. You've done that a lot. I know that's been a big effort for this office. Can you talk about that, why that's so important to you, and what that feels like to you when you see these men and women finally be free?
Well, look, I mean, when we convict the wrong person, there are several things that are occurring. Number one, you have the injustice of an innocent person going to prison, right? And that in itself is really very problematic, because that impacts the credibility of our entire system, as well as, impacts the life of a human being. But the other component that often people forget, especially for many folks in policing and otherwise, if you convict the wrong person, that means that the actual perpetrator, the one that caused the harm, is still out there, right? And we have seen this over. I mean, we had a case like Mr. Maurice Hastings. He was convicted of rape and murder. He did 38 years in prison. He consistently not only maintained his innocence, but he actually asked to have his DNA tested. This office told him that the DNA was not there to be tested. I came into office, we tested it, found the DNA, tested it. Not only was he not the person that committed the rape and murder, but the person that did went on to rape other women before he was caught, right? Have we got it right the first time, maybe we would have prevented other rapes. And nobody knows, right? We have, Mr. Solorio, right, who was convicted of, of a drive-by shooting in Whittier, right, at age 19. Did nearly 2 decades in prison, and now he's back with his family, and he's, now he walks around with his dog that he calls Freedom, which I think is as a dog owner, yeah, and somebody that loves dogs, I love the image of Freedom walking right around with him, right? That is something that touches your heart, touches my heart, because you see families that are coming together again, right? You're seeing people that are being given a second opportunity to be reintegrated in our community, and those were people that shouldn't have been in prison the first time.
A couple other issues that your office is dealing with. We talked a little bit about retail theft. Yeah. There's a lot of people that you talk to out on the streets who feel like you're not tough enough, and because of that you're encouraging some of this retail theft because they feel like there aren't consequences to crime. What do you say to all the people out there who feel scared and who are blaming you?
Yeah, first of all, look, I think when you look at our prosecutorial approach, over 100,000 serious crimes have been prosecuted. That's on par with the 10-year average for this office for the last 3 years. You look at our conviction rate, and let's say organized retail theft, 89%, as opposed to 64% conviction rate before I came into office. When you look at the sentencing, people are going to prison for some of these crimes, right? You look at the fact that we're, when we're going after violent crime, we're sending people to prison for very long periods of time. So if you look at our conviction rates, you look at our filing rates, you look at the sentencing, which, by the way, we don't control because the sentencing is really up to the courts, you see a very different picture. And I understand the frustration. And unfortunately, we're at a moment in our history where there are multiple competing assessment of what the facts are, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have right now somebody saying that, Haitians, immigrants are eating dogs, right? But the people in these communities that are there are saying this is not occurring, right? But that doesn't stop people from saying that, right? So I think that this is a product of the moment. And I think it really takes good people to stand up and call it out when they see it.
Another issue, we've seen these protests from a lot of those pro-Palestinian people shutting down freeways, shutting down the way to LAX, shutting down commerce. Mm-hmm. How should the DA react to that?
Well, look, this is an interesting area, right? Because you have overlapping jurisdictions, right? So you have in the county, we're about 10 million people. About 5 million people in the county have jurisdictions that have a city attorney that handles misdemeanor prosecutions, right? So a lot of what you're saying, they're misdemeanors. So let's take the protest at the schools, for instance, right? The felony cases that have been presented to this office, they have been filed, mm-hmm. right? But the majority of the cases were misdemeanors. One exception for us, it was in Claremont Colleges, where we handle both misdemeanors and felonies. In those cases, we file a lot of cases, right? But when you're talking about UCLA, USC, when you're talking about some people maybe, blocking a church or some in some parts of the city of LA, a lot of that ends up in the hands of the city attorney. And I believe she's handling it appropriate, but I couldn't tell you because that's not an area that we have the details. But I can tell you that the cases that are being presented to the office, we're filing felony charges. We're actually, when it comes to hate crimes, we're filing at a higher rate, not only than this office did previously, but we're filing at a higher rate than the entire state. And our conviction rates is nearly 80%. So we're filing, nearly 90% of the cases, and our conviction rates about 80%. We are by far more aggressive in charging the cases that are being presented to us than the office was before or the rest of the state. But again, I think there's always a lot of misunderstanding about jurisdictional overlapping because it is confusing. Misdemeanors in the city of LA are not prosecuted by my office. Should
it be a felony to block the freeway or block the way to LAX?
It really depends on what it is. Again, we don't make the laws, right? We follow the laws. And you also have to remember that in addition to what should be, first of all, there has to be an investigation and an arrest, right? The body has to be brought over. I can tell you unequivocally that the arrests that are being presented to our office based on the evidence. We're filing this case is over 80% of the rate of filing, and we're getting convictions at around 80%. So we are very aggressively filing the cases of law enforcement, bringing over, and absolutely there should be attention and consequences for that behavior.
End on a couple questions about you. What is your why?
What is my why?
Yeah.
Look, I'm very passionate about creating a community where everybody feels safe, where people feel like they have the same opportunities that anybody else when it comes to the criminal justice system. I want a community where, quite frankly, my grandkids do not grow up in what my kids grew up, right? I want a place that we focus on hope, that we focus on, regardless of who you are, that everybody gets treated equally in the system. And for me, that's my North Star, and I will continue to push for that.
Was there a moment where your philosophy changed, or you sort of flipped and had a realization we got to do things differently?
Yeah, I mean, look, first of all, I've always been very committed to public safety, right?
Sure.
I don't think you find anybody that becomes a police officer that doesn't care about public safety. That's the driving force for the women and men that become cops and prosecutors. So I've always had that as my driving force. But as I evolve and I mature in my own professional life, I saw the inequities of the system. I also saw the failures. I saw the high rates of recidivism, the continuing rearresting of the same people over and over again. And I saw the huge inequalities, like going back to the whole issue of the drugs, right? You know, scraping a coke pipe to get a residue of coke. You had a felony, you go to prison. Down the street in a very different neighborhood, people are in the backyard, using coke and all this stuff, and we were not there, right? Mm-hmm. So for me, that by itself created a big question mark for me, and then I started to look for alternatives and look at how other nations and even other communities within our own country are doing things.
How would you summarize your legacy as DA so far?
Well, look, I think that when you look at the massive system that I was able to be honored to have the opportunity to run for at least a term, and you look at all the changes that we've done, you look at not only the crime is going down, but you also look at the exonerations. You look at the fact that we have resentenced now 300 people, and out of 300, only 4 have reoffended, which is it's like 0.01%. When you look at the work that we're doing around reentry with juveniles, when you're looking at the work that we're doing in dealing with wage theft, people often don't realize that the biggest theft crime in LA County is employers stealing from workers, which, by the way, impacts not only the worker, but it impacts a good employer, impacts all of us. Over $1 billion are stolen from workers every year. We created a wage theft unit that now has had 325 workers that have gotten back over $3 million in back pay. All these things are things that we're doing that were not being done before, and that really excites me. And again, if the voters were to honor me with another term, we'll continue to evolve and hopefully do things better.
And we end with something called personal issues, which is fun. This is our rapid fire game of the first thing that comes to mind to get to know your cultural favorites, so we get to know a little bit more about you. So here we go.
All right.
What's your favorite TV show?
I tell you that I am so bad because I'm boring, okay? So a lot of the TV that I watch is like news. I'm a news junkie.
Love that.
And then, the other thing is I like some of the stuff that comes out, like, the Masters of the Air, like the sort of theme movies, that kind of movie series that go back into history.
Okay.
And so those things are very appealing to me. And now, my wife is into training our puppy more and more, so I'm being forced now to look at puppy training shows.
Okay, Cesar Millan. What's your favorite movie of all time?
God, I really have many, but I have to say that the first Top Gun.
Okay.
Not the second. And the second one, I know that the second one was great, but the first one was just that.
It was
the
original.
Technology and all the stuff, I thought it was just so
Need
great.
for Speed, baby. Favorite book?
Favorite book? You know what? There are many books that I like. Again, I tend to be boring because I don't really read fiction. So I tend to read books that are, about the work. I'm trying to think of one. I got like 12 books on my shelf right now, and I'm about halfway through several of them. I can't even think of one that I can say, this is my favorite over any other book.
What's your favorite sports team?
Well, if I were not to say the Dodgers here, I'd probably get going. But they are.
Yeah, okay. You run the Giants. Your consultant would be coming after me.
Yeah.
And lastly, who is your role model?
Yeah, my father.
Why is that?
My father was a very simple man, and yet he was very complex. My father achieved a 6th grade education, and he was the most educated person in his family in terms of formal education. But he was a man of his word. He actually, to his detriment, he would say, "I don't believe in contracts," which obviously was antiquated by today. I said, if I'm doing business with you, we shake our hand, and I expect you to do your part, and I do mine. And if you don't, then you broke that bond. He was an idealist, right? My father, that I'm Cuban American.
Right.
My father fought for the revolution. He actually almost got killed by the Batista regime, which is the one that Fidel Castro overthrew. And then he was hoping for a democracy in Cuba. And when that turned out not to be the case, then again he was on the wrong side. It was funny because he died. He passed about 10 years ago. But he says, I always seem to be on the wrong side. And I told him, and that wasn't really his last days in bed. So I said, no, Dad, you were not on you were on the right side of history. And yeah.
What do you think he would think of you as DA?
I think he was very proud of me.
Yeah.
He would not always agree with me. He was a very Republican in his thinking.
Yeah.
So there would be certain things that he would not. But I think he was very proud of me. I think that I was the first in my family to go to college. He was very proud of the fact that I joined the Army. When I went in the Army, people were getting drafted, and I didn't. I joined, and I can tell you that the day that I told him I joined the Army, I think he was just so incredibly proud. So.
Yeah. All right, well, we think of him tonight, and thank you so much for taking time.
My pleasure.
To get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah.
DA George Gascón, great to see you.
Thank you so much. Great to see you, too.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.